Looks like some big Nintendo sequels are on the way for Switch 2. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today I would like to have a simple but fun discussion on how it is looking like throughout this Switch 2 generation, Nintendo may have plans to bring about multiple installments for their different series. And today I don't mean to talk about the obvious ones like the next Smash Brothers, the next Animal Crossing, the next Splatoon or Pokemon. These are givens. We're going to get at least one more installments for these particular series, and in the case of something like Splatoon, there may be multiple throughout the generation. I think there are other sequels we can see throughout the Switch 2 generation that perhaps people are not expecting. And I actually think it makes a lot of sense when we consider the rising development costs of the industry. It is easier to put together a sequel based off something that's already established as opposed to building something entirely new. Which is why we may see multiple Splatoon games throughout the Switch 2 generation, similar to what we saw for Switch 1, and Nintendo may do this a few times with some other big series throughout this generation. And so with that in mind, I want to talk about a few that I think are very exciting, that I think there's a pretty good chance we'll see throughout the next 8 years or so of Switch 2 being the main focus. But before going forward, let me take this moment to point out, I am now aiming for a new goal of 60,000 subscribers. So if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. So let's open things up here by talking about Donkey Kong. We are getting Donkey Kong Bananza in July, and I think you can make the argument that Donkey Kong Bananza in some way is a bit of a sequel to Donkey Kong 64. It is the second 3D Donkey Kong game, so by that perspective alone, I think you can already make the argument. But also, we've seen a lot of things referencing Donkey Kong 64, like when DK says, "Oh, banana," when you collect a golden banana, or how we now see the Rambi theme from DK 64, or how there's a substantial amount of evidence that King K. Rool, the main rival of the DK series, may be returning in this game. That's not confirmed yet, but it's definitely widely speculated, and if that ends up being the case, this would be the first time that King K. Rool is back in a mainline game since DK64. So I just think it's interesting to consider that DK Bananza could perhaps be a bit like a sequel to DK64. But that's not really what I'm getting at here. I think there's actually a very strong chance that Bananza may be the first 3D Donkey Kong game on Switch 2, and to be clear, what I mean is not the last. Maybe think of it somewhat like this. Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3 all came out on the Super Nintendo. I'm not necessarily expecting 3 3D Donkey Kong games in the Switch 2 era, but perhaps there may be a follow-up. And my thinking on this stems from some rumors we heard many years ago that seem to have been proven true. So for years, we had heard a rumor that maybe the Odyssey team was working on a 3D Donkey Kong game, or a Donkey Kong game of some kind. And from what we've seen of DK Bananza, clearly there are some elements from Super Mario Odyssey development. But there is a rumor from DK Vine that I find to be even more interesting, and DK Vine is known to be a highly respected Donkey Kong fan site, and they've chimed in on some reports here and there over the years, including the Vicarious Vision report of them working on an open world Donkey Kong game under Activision that was cancelled, which has been corroborated by several sources. But anyways, what they said so many years ago on this Donkey Kong rumor is this. Development of the new Donkey Kong game purportedly began around 2017 or 2018 when Nintendo decided to bring Donkey Kong back internally for the first time since Nintendo EAD's Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, although Jungle Beat was more of a stopgap than a permanent status quo. I've been led to believe that this is a new EPD team that has formed from other teams specifically for the purpose of creating Donkey Kong games. And so I find this last line here to be interesting, that a new team was put together within EPD for the purpose of creating Donkey Kong games, in other words, more than one. And part of what's fascinating about this from a few years ago is that when we were hearing about these rumors of the Odyssey team or some part of the Odyssey team working on a Donkey Kong game, part of that rumor also included that Nintendo wanted to bring Donkey Kong back to prominence, relevance. And so what have we seen of Donkey Kong? We've seen Donkey Kong involved with the movies, there's the Donkey Kong Park expansion, we've seen multiple Donkey Kong games, including DK Bananza, which is clearly a pretty big deal game. And so maybe Nintendo's plan here is to make Donkey Kong relevant kind of like he was way back when, with the original Donkey Kong, which broke Nintendo out into the West, and then also the Donkey Kong Country games on Super Nintendo. Perhaps Nintendo's going for something similar like this, so they put together a new, dedicated Donkey Kong team, with the purpose of making not just one Donkey Kong game, but continually making more, having Donkey Kong become a mainstay once again alongside other big Nintendo series like Mario, Zelda, and more. And so the implication here is that there will be follow-ups to Bananza, and we won't have to wait 10, 20 years from now. It could happen within a handful of years, which would fit it into the Switch 2 generation because Bananza is coming out in the beginning. Think about how when Switch 1 came out, we saw sequels to a lot of the games that came out in that first year or two later on to Switch 2 generation, like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 following up Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Splatoon 3 following up Splatoon 2. So I think there's actually a very good chance that Bananza is just the beginning, and there will be more Donkey Kong games moving forward. It's a new era of Donkey Kong. I mean, when we take a look at all the new renders, it seems like Nintendo's ready to refresh Donkey Kong and keep him relevant this time moving forward forevermore. And that's immensely exciting to me. And I also think this makes a lot of sense because if you have now a dedicated Donkey Kong team, then sure, maybe some of them had a hand in Mario Odyssey development and they pulled from other parts of Nintendo as well to form this new team, that then affords the actual 3D Mario team to still work on a 3D Mario game, which common sense wise makes the most sense. Why would Nintendo prioritize 3D Donkey Kong, something that's unproven, and forego something that has always been successful, always immensely important to the beginning of every single Nintendo generation, a mainline Mario game? So I absolutely believe that a new 3D Mario's in the works is not that far off. We will see relatively soon, if not this year, next year. And there's a separate team that likely has some crossover and relation to the Mario team. But it's not just Bananza that I think is going to see a follow-up in the Switch 2 generation. We've recently heard rumors that Metroid Prime 5 is already in the beginning stages of development here. Now at first that may seem a bit like a crazy idea, but let's consider this for a moment here. Metroid Prime 4 has been in development for a very, very long time. But the Metroid series, and especially the Metroid Prime series, was actually very relevant and a big part of Nintendo's consistent lineup in the early 2000s. And similar to Donkey Kong, sort of lost its way as Nintendo went to the Wii generation and beyond. Perhaps Retro Studios has positioned itself to be just the Metroid developer moving forward, and maybe they can expand a little bit more and they could have some other projects, but it may be the case that they are just best suited to making Metroid games. And from what we've heard of the development costs of Metroid Prime 4, and from what we've seen of all the hirings and how long it's been in development and just how ambitious it is, it's clearly a very expensive game, one of the most expensive games ever made by Nintendo, so it just makes sense from a business perspective that they would want to follow up Metroid Prime 4 using that same tech, improving upon it somewhat, and having another sequel so you can get more bang for your buck, more out of your investment here. It just makes sense, and with Prime 4 also being an early Switch 2 title, it makes sense that at some point during the Switch 2 era, there will be room for another one, and this time with Prime 5, it will likely have been made with Switch 2 solely in mind, and not for Switch 1. And I do think it should be noted that what we are seeing with the Prime 4 Switch 2 edition appears to be more of an ambitious effort than the other Switch 2 editions. Because not only are we seeing a resolution boost here, but they've taken the time to integrate mouse controls, and it almost looks like the game was made with mouse controls in mind. Especially when we consider all the psychic powers and all. But even beyond that, yes, this game is seeing a resolution and performance boost here, but there aren't many games that are sporting a 120 FPS mode. And also not every game is running in 4K. But even on top of that, the Switch 2 version of Prime 4 also has improved textures. Improved texture work has not been an improvement we've seen with all the other Switch 2 edition games, it's just been a resolution boost. So the Switch 2 edition of Prime 4 is almost being treated like a significant remaster here. And so I find this interesting when we consider what Retro Studios would want out of Metroid on the Switch 2. They're already showing an eagerness to improve this game for the hardware, and I imagine they're going to be even more eager to develop Prime 5 with just the Switch 2 in mind. They'll be able to do something even more impressive on this console. And they may be able to follow up Prime 4 in a relatively quick amount of time. I'm not expecting it in 2 years, even though there are rumors suggesting so, but I definitely think there's plenty of opportunity for it to make it out in the thick of the Switch 2 generation. So Prime 4 might just be the beginning of a whole new saga. Now, something I've gotten some pushback on, and that's probably just because I keep talking about it, is Luigi's Mansion 4. I think there is a fantastic chance we are going to see Luigi's Mansion 4 very soon. And let's say it's not coming out this year or anything like that. I still think it makes sense that Luigi's Mansion 4 is going to come out very soon, because Luigi's Mansion 3, very successful, the most successful game in the Luigi's Mansion series by far, and the series only seems to be growing by game. And it's not like this series is dormant. I definitely think there will be a Luigi's Mansion 4. And so maybe that's one of those that is kind of a given for people, that there will be a Luigi's Mansion 4 at some point on Switch 2. Seems like a fairly safe bet. But I guess what I'm ultimately getting at here is really harping on the idea that Luigi's Mansion 4 may be coming out sooner than expected, and could be a real significant showcase for the Switch 2. I go back to the mouse controls, I think that's something that could really benefit Luigi's Mansion. And I think also considering the history of a high level of detail with the Luigi's Mansion games, the significant leap of Switch 2 power here would greatly benefit the series. But recently we got confirmation that Pokemon Legends ZA is coming out October 16th. And some people have taken this to mean that Luigi's Mansion 4 is no longer likely for this year. But I'm going to push back on that. Firstly, yes, Next Level Games, the developer of the Luigi's Mansion series, has been consistently putting out games every 3 years. Even for their first game on Switch, Luigi's Mansion 3, when they had to make a significant leap in hardware which might lead one to believe there'd be a little bit of delay, there were no delays. At least in terms of maintaining that 3-year pattern of release here. And so in this year 2025, if they continue to follow the pattern, they are due for a game, and I think if there's any game they're going to choose to do to open up the new generation of Switch 2, it would be a follow-up to their most successful series to date, which would be Luigi's Mansion. And we have seen recent hiring posts at Next Level Games showing that they're already ready to move on to their next project, which suggests that they may be wrapping up the current one, which further strengthens the notion that they are going to maintain this pattern here of a 3-year release, meaning that they have something planned for 2025, and we don't know what that is yet. But when we consider that it's Mario's 40th anniversary and that also Luigi's Mansion 2 Dark Moon came out last year on Switch 1, I think there's even more reason to believe this here. Now, some people are taking the release of Luigi's Mansion 2 HD last year to mean that Luigi's Mansion 4 won't be coming out this year, but there's actually a history of Nintendo putting out remasters shortly before a big brand new installment. Look at the remake for Luigi's Mansion 1 back in 2018, what came out in 2019? Luigi's Mansion 3. Even this year, just recently, Donkey Kong Country Returns HD came out this past January, and now we're getting Donkey Kong Bananza in July. And I think it's also worth noting that Nintendo has announced that Luigi's Mansion 1 is going to be made available on Nintendo GameCube Classics on Switch 2. So if there is going to be a Luigi's Mansion 4 coming out later this year, they are going to have the entire series available on the console, which we have seen Nintendo like to do before they put out pretty big installments for particular games, like Pikmin for example. But going back to the point of Legends ZA coming out October 16th, this is leading some people to believe that there's no room for another major release from Nintendo in the month of October, but I beg to differ. 1. Legends ZA is still a Switch 2 edition game, and we've already seen that Nintendo likes to put out exclusive Switch 2 games in the same month as a Switch 2 edition game. We are getting Breath and Tears of the Kingdom Switch 2 edition alongside Mario Kart World on June 5th, and then in July we are getting Super Mario Party Jamboree plus TV set Switch 2 edition and the exclusive Donkey Kong Bananza. And so while I agree Legends ZA is a bit of a bigger deal because 1, it's Pokemon, but also 2, because it's still a new game so it has more significance, at the end of the day it's not an exclusive though. So I still think that offers a little bit more reason to think that Nintendo may want to have something else in that month. Not to mention that there's already a pretty significant history of Nintendo putting out multiple games in the October-November months over the years. The other day I talked about this, and some people said I was cherry-picking here by just bringing up 2021, where we saw the release of Mario Party and Metroid Dread. But it isn't just 2021, there are other years. Like in October of 2022, where we saw the release for Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope, and Bayonetta 3. So we do have a history here of multiple significant games coming out during these holiday months, and we are talking about the launch of Nintendo's next generation here. If there is a time where Nintendo is going to publish more than one major game per month, this is the time. And interestingly, Legend ZA coming out October 16th is 2 weeks removed from October 30th, a day before Halloween. And what would be the most ideal game to come out during that period of time? Luigi's Mansion 4. It's a theory, one that I've been shoving down everyone's throats, admittedly, but I just think it makes so much sense. And I'm gonna throw out one more potential sequel here that, honestly, I think is gonna happen. And maybe people won't agree with me here, but I think it makes a lot of sense. So, the sequel I'm talking about is a sequel that in some ways already exists, and that is Majora's Mask. Yes, the Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask remake. That is what I'm alluding to here. So we've been talking about this theory of an Ocarina of Time remake, which is yet to have been confirmed, by the way, but over the years there's been mounting evidence for this idea, and recently we have gotten an updated rumor on Ocarina of Time remake. We've talked about that already, and the idea behind this rumor is that they are updating the art style or direction or visual direction of this game, perhaps suggesting it's going to be a bit of a bigger deal. But the thing is, once we get this Ocarina of Time remake, that will then open the doors for a Majora's Mask remake. And when I say remake, I don't just mean like the remasters we saw on 3DS, right? I'm talking about a modern significant overhaul here. The gaps of time between the original releases for these games and the 3DS remasters versus when they would be eventually coming out in the Switch 2 generation, this gap we've been waiting for since the 3DS remasters and whenever these come out would be longer. And so I think it's fairly plausible, and I also think it makes sense for Nintendo to go in this direction, considering what's going on regarding Zelda in this generation. So I'm not even assuming that this Ocarina of Time remake is coming out soon. I'm hoping it's going to make it out for the 40th anniversary. That was initially my prediction, but this rumor of this visual redesign of the game may push it back further. We shall see. Fingers crossed, we don't have to wait that long. But if they are doing something like this, and by the way, the rumor also includes that the Zelda team, or rather Nintendo in-house, is working on this remake, we would then assume that the next mainline Zelda would probably come out at least a year, maybe 2 years or so after this remake, right? Which would then place the next actual totally brand new Zelda like in the middle of the Switch 2 generation. Which might be a bit of a long wait here, but if you have a big remake that's ambitious, but with perhaps some actual changes beyond just visual changes, then a big brand new Zelda, and then perhaps you lengthen the life of that with an expansion pass in the following year, and then we move on to a big remake of Majora's Mask in the tail end of Switch 2, I think that would actually be a pretty solid way to handle 3D Zelda over the next 8 years or so of Switch 2. Of course, this is all contingent upon this idea of the Ocarina of Time remake being a significant remake and it coming out fairly soon first. We shall see. But what do you think? What do you make of this possibility of these big sequels coming out throughout the Switch 2 generation? Are there any others you have in mind? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.